dialogue, design, animation, and annotation. NPCs fill the worlds of our favorite video games in a multitude of ways. I happen to like people watching in games, and I also like virtual photography, aka the use of in-game photo modes and camera tools to frame and compose interesting shots. So at the intersection of those two things, I've been photographing NPCs as my subjects of interest for some time now. I talk to them when I can, follow them around, and I imagine what their lives might be like. I pay extra attention to their clothing, character design, behavior patterns that I think might go unnoticed by the average player. And here's what I learned. In Final Fantasy XVI features a lot of towns, and subsequently, a lot of great NPC vignettes. However, Final Fantasy XVI is also a story about enslavement and emancipation, and so a lot of what's portrayed in those vignettes ranges from cold, to cruel, to depraved. On the flip side, we also see moments of joy, humor, autonomy, and self-governance to match, as a major theme of the game is that it isn't enough to just free the enslaved. They must be empowered to thrive and live on their own terms as well. Still, there are gaps the game misses between and beyond these two poles. Gaps other writers have critiqued, works cited in the description, but it bears repeating here, still, because any discussion about the game's NPCs is inextricable from discussion about what they represent. What are they doing in terms of world building? What aren't they? How do Valisthia's different nations treat their enslaved peoples differently? And how do their stories change with the times? How do they act in your secret hideaway after they've been sheltered and liberated? And what small pleasures are there to find between the margins of it all? You know, what acts of kindness, humor, and resistance? And who gets to enjoy those pleasures? Spoilers for Final Fantasy XVI lie ahead. Here's the setup. In the continent of Valistthia, people rely on magical crystals mined from the mountains in order to channel their magic. 16's most novel NPCs are the ones who showcase these magics. You can see various townspeople using crystals to draw on different elements to complement their tasks. They can be seen using water magic to fill cups and glasses, or even drinking directly out of their crystals if they're out on the road, maybe in the desert. You can spot them using ice magic to keep buckets of fish chilled, or using crystalline fire magic to light cigars. Everyone who carries a personal shard also has this case for it on the side of their waist, in which they can stow it away when done. Shards are not exclusively for personal use either. Some NPCs bond over their shared use of crystals. Here, you can see some kids who've swiped one of their dad's shards and are using it to play with rocks. You can see a father teaching his son how to aim and keep a fresh catch of fish on ice. For warriors who prefer magic to swordplay, the crystals aren't carried by hand but slotted into staves, so as to channel their spells with more precision and dexterity. Other characters go a step further. They form civic-minded habits around their crystals and share their magic communally in the interest of mutual aid and public service. At one point, after nightfall, you can see the people of Lostwing banding together to do their chores by crystal light. One person holds the light, while the others work in it.
It doesn't matter how hard we sweep or scrub.
If you get your camera up close to the crystal, you can also hear a low ringing noise from within it, which is a nice touch in terms of sound design. Some cities also invest in larger municipal shards. Large water crystals can be slotted into the mechanisms above public wells to draw fresh water faster and with minimal effort. NPCs might gather near the well to wash clothes with a water source readily nearby. Light crystals are slotted into lampposts for illumination. What you need to understand though is that the crystals are a rare and limited resource. Nothing drives this point home further than seeing how the towns change over time. Revisit them over the course of the game, and you'll see more and more people doing their chores by hand as the magic around Valisthea starts to die out. You'll see wells without municipal shards, far less mystical and lively. You'll see NPCs lamenting to their neighbors that the energy in their last shard has expired.
It's all but spent. What do we do now?
Others even talk about leaving.
We could leave. But where would we go?
What can they do? The crystals are not the only way to use magic though. This is where bearers come in. Those blessed with the power to use magic without a crystal are, in fact, cursed. They're marked with a dark brand on their cheeks and called bearers, or branded, aka slaves forced to use their abilities to work for those without. However, using magic without a crystal exerts pressure on the body. Overworked bearers fall at risk of succumbing to illness and eventually petrification, turning to stone if they exercise their powers too much. Their masters force them to do so anyway. This is the central tension throughout the game. Bearers can be spotted around the world casting spells by hand, on the same chores their masters would use crystals for. Using water magic to refill wells, or to water crops, wind magic to trim hedges, and dry laundry, ice magic to keep buckets of fish on ice, and raw meats too, cure magic to heal their masters, fire magic to cook or bake, or to heat up a forge. As the game itself specifies, each of these tasks takes a variable level of energy. Working a forge exerts an especially high load, for instance. While most bearers look overworked, you can see the ones who work in higher commitment jobs have started to also be affected by the curse, their arms or legs turning ashen and almost to stone. Here's an example. There's an abusive blacksmith in the town of Northreach.
Branded! Who told you to rest? Stoke those damn flames!
The first time you see him, he's working a single bearer to near death at his forge. Here, you can see her arm has already started to turn to stone. If you revisit the forge later on, you'll see that she's gone, replaced with 2 bearers working in her place. The blacksmith will even complain about how none of them seem to last. Visit him later still, and only one of those 2 bearers will still be with him.
The captain wants 2 score pikeheads and as many swords as you're able to muster.
And I want a new bearer who can keep my forge fired. Looks like neither of us are getting what we want.
Come back towards the end of the game when the magic is dying out, and that bearer will just be sweeping the floors instead. No spells left in him, yet still as dejected as ever. But what options are there but to obey their masters? When a bearer fails to, say, fill his master's cup with water magic, he's subject to verbal abuse and ridicule.
If you can't even fill my cup, you're no use to me. Begone!
This is another vignette from the town of Dalimil. An aristocrat can't seem to get any spells out of his bearer and gets increasingly frustrated as the game goes on.
Did the constables test you properly before they gave you that brand?
When the town is attacked by bandits, master and slave get separated.
What's that Branded doing all on his own? He lost his master.
And it's the one time the bearer looks noticeably relieved in spite of everything. You might spot his master hiding in the bushes nearby, comically scared out of his mind.
Where the hell has my bearer disappeared to? I shall have him whipped for abandoning his master in his hour of need.
Visit them after the attack, and he'll be back to berating the poor bearer.
If you ever do that again, I'll whip you to within an inch of your life. Run from your master, would you?
Notice how his posture shifts back here, from upright when momentarily free, back to slouched over and subservient. Eventually, the noble sells him off and uses the money to buy crystals so he can use magic himself.
Gilbert, take this crystal. It's no more use than the bearer I sold to buy it. Ah, well, can always buy another. And at least I don't have to feed it.
But it's too late. The magic is gone. The crystals are useless. His fellow townspeople have to talk to him to get a grip.
The Akashic are coming. Why did I sell that blasted bearer? He could have kept them from me.
Calm yourself. We'll be fine.
There are markets that depict the sale of bearers too, where they're talked about like commodities. In fact, the pair being sold just outside of Northreach when you first arrive seem to be the same the blacksmith replaces his old bearer with when you circle back. By all accounts, these are thoroughly detailed, impactful moments of narrative and world building, but they also prompted a big question for me. What are the limitations of this big project? Not just the game's, but mine. Final Fantasy XVI is the first game in which closing in on these characters to hunt for cool details has kind of felt like missing the point. I was uncovering story beats and trivia as always, sure, and on the one hand, it did seem that recognizing the bearer's humanity, actually looking them in the eye as they worked, aligned with where the game wanted to situate me and my player character. Clive is, himself, a former bearer turned freedom fighter, after all. But on the other, it felt a little exploitative to frame these details as, look how interesting this is. Not because it's not. Not because there aren't things that are, but because it reminds me too much of the dark side of photojournalism, too much of an instinct towards aestheticizing misery, abuse, and abject poverty for exhibition rather than for commentary or introspection. Cards on the table. I will still be as detail-oriented in this one as I am for my other NPC videos. I will still admire the work of the artists, of the writers, the animators, and the level designers. I want to give their real-life labor the dues it deserves. That said, I will also unpack why this exercise feels more complicated than usual with FF16. Fun facts are nice, but the developers clearly want us to take their themes seriously, want us to engage with the cracks in the fantasy, and the joy that persists in spite of them. That persistence burns that much brighter. The trivia is that much more interesting, because Clive takes the plight of the bearer seriously and actively fights against it. Enter the Grand Duchy of Rosaria. Here, the game introduces us to its baseline status quo through the eyes of Clive, Joshua, and Jill as kids. Something I noticed early on is that NPCs you spot in passing can actually go on to hold story significance later. Take Wade and Tyler, who are placed in a prominent spot by the side of the road, tending to a chocobo. The subtitles still label them with a generic identifier until such a time that Clive is introduced to them himself, but you can already overhear them chatting here.
Would that it was so simple.
You get a sense of their voices. Later, the two will join you as traveling companions on a handful of quests on the critical path. Moving on, we also get our first glimpse of the civilians, blacksmiths, and soldiers of Rosaria. Their outfits differ based on their ranks, as you can see here. The captains wear heavier armor, complete with shoulder plates, while the foot soldiers bare their shoulders. Check out the detailed grime on their weapons too. They've all clearly seen some use, and you can spot at least one man polishing it off his blade. When you pass these soldiers, they might greet you with a traditional warrior salute. Across most of Valisthea, NPCs typically just wave hello, so I appreciate the specificity here. It becomes more meaningful after the time skip, when you reunite with some of these surviving warriors for the first time and recognize the salute again. Other NPCs around the duchy include this assurer who inspects crystals to make sure they're of usable quality, There are these handmaidens who you can see rolling dough, while their bearer sorts oranges nearby. And these two gossips, who'll tease Clive and Jill about how they look good together.
Well, don't you make an handsome pair? We'll be having a feast for the two of you soon enough.
And of course, there are slave masters and bearers, all working in service to the duchy. One master will even make a comment about how they rely on these bearers, so they don't have to waste precious crystals. These are loaded words, heavy with a weight we don't recognize in its entirety yet. Young Clive is clearly uncomfortable about the way bearers are treated here. They're yelled at, dehumanized, and asked to grovel before his ruling family. When Clive extends them kindness, their supervisors miss the point and stress that the bearers should count themselves lucky. They're treated better here than in other parts of the world. We see that the maidservants employed by Clive's mother aren't treated much better. Here, you can see how they keep their heads hung when interacting with her. There's an interesting dynamic between the paid manual laborers and the bearers they oversee, as many of these employees pass on their frustrations onto the bearers, or even shirk their responsibilities while leaving the work to them.
My lord, it's not how it looks. I'm, inspecting the castle walls by order of the Duchess.
Unfortunately, the bearers of Valisthea are offered little story or dimensionality, both by their masters and by the game itself. Most incidental vignettes, including the two I highlighted in the beginning, serve to flesh out the characters and journeys of the slavers, or, at best, the bearers' sympathizers, while the enslaved themselves are silent, tortured, and near universally meek. Most of them carry themselves hunched forwards, as we've seen. There's clearly psychological trauma here, but that the trauma has manifested uniformly, in the same way, across all of these characters across all of these different environments and time periods, feels a bit hollow. We're told Clive's brand might make these people more open around him.
And despite my best attempts at secrecy, my efforts to dole out comestibles have been noticed. The brand upon your cheek affords you a certain freedom, a freedom I could sorely use.
But we never glimpse them when they're unsupervised. They never whisper behind their masters' backs. They never plot, joke, or sing, and they rarely complain or express any interiority outside of sadness. I enjoyed the noble from Dalimil a lot, as he's performed with an over-the-top, almost comical voice, which makes the conclusion of his arc feel almost cathartic.
The shards around here are as spent as mine, and I don't have anyone to send out to hunt for more. Why, oh, why did I sell my bearer? I could have put him to work. Now I have no choice but to work myself.
Look who got his just desserts. But his bearer? He was little more than a prop. Even then, him enjoying an opportune moment alone makes him a rare exception with a semblance of personality, but still a silent one, and far from the norm. They seem to be a hive mind, and even when liberated are helpless without instruction from their saviors. Surely some of these people who have been forced to do physical labor by their former masters, even in the absence of magic, would know how to collect water from a well or plant seeds, right? To quote Ash Parrish on The Verge, bearers are treated as tools, created and utilized in service to a plot. They exist only to be a permanent underclass of damsels in distress, or as hacky object lessons on why discrimination is bad. Writes Philip Russell on Kotaku, and while the developers were able to imagine a plethora of grounded ways in which the magic of bearers could be exploited, they often fail to present the same level of awareness in thinking about the psychology of slavery, both on the part of the enslaved and the enslavers. And he's right. It's a missed opportunity, not least of all because, as he points out, there's a time skip over the entire period when Clive himself was a slave. We never see what his day-to-day as a bearer was like. We only hear about it after the fact. Welcome to Clive's Hideaway, where he, Sid, Jill, and the party bring those they freed into a place where they can live freely. I love the Hideaway. It is the one place in the base game where bearers are allowed to show dimensionality and just be distinct characters. After they've been freed, of course. It is also a place teeming with great NPC vignettes and interactions. The first time you visit, the carpenters will chat about grabbing a drink after work.
Fancy a mug of Kenneth's coldest when we're done?
The next time, you can find them making good on that premise. As the settlement grows and expands over the course of the game, so too do these vignettes. As Clive starts to get to know the characters in it, their names on the subtitles change from things like Studious Bearer, Lame Bearer, Inebriated Bearer, or Keeper of the Stores to Name, Profession, Hortense, Keeper of the Stores. It's a great way of showing both Clive's growth and of this community's, of how he finds a space with them, and how they start to discover their own unique interests away from the iron fists of Valisthia's more oppressive nations. Our resident healer, Tarja, has also discovered a risky procedure to remove the brands that bearers are marked with, which you might pick up on before the story formally confirms it.
I hear there's trouble in Rosaria.
Our resident seamstresses do great work too. Here's a closer look at the costumes around the Hideaway, which includes drawstring shirts, tunics, fancy robes, different kinds of scarves, including ribbon scarves of various colors, and sun hats made of straw. You can tell there are liberated bearers from all over the continent here, as the seamstresses have fashioned together both the medieval Western-inspired clothes, as seen in Rosaria and Sandbrak, and the more Middle Eastern and North African-inspired outfits from Talmekia. Those are the influences on the record, but I suspect the artists took inspiration from South Asian fashion for these designs too. It's an interesting aesthetic blend, one I'll discuss more later. We see block print sashes, bangles around the wrists, and ornate armbands of different colors, as well as hand-carved beads and necklaces. We see friends from all over the world in patterned togas and heavy scarves draped around wide shoulders. We see corsets and capelets, bandanas, and blouses. One thing I really appreciate is that we don't see the more extravagant clothes you can spot clearly affluent NPCs wearing in other parts of the world, because that just wouldn't make sense for the Hideaway. So you won't see star-studded belts, or intricate robes like the nobles of Northreach wear. Nor will you see the fancy rings or gold buttons that the aristocrats of Talmekia wear. You won't see these larger pieces of jewelry either. No, at the Hideaway, the seamstresses make do with limited resources. The developers might be reusing a lot of assets here, but they are deliberate about which ones fit the bill. And that comes through in the costume design. A visiting trader drops by Karen's shop sometimes, and he's dressed noticeably differently from everyone else. We see soldiers of different builds, clad in various colors. Folks feasting on roast and sitting with playing cards by their tankards.
I'm not going back to that life. Ever. You hear me?
Agreed. Even if it means never seeing the sun again.
We see some truly weird pants. We see carpenters at work, decked out in the Emperor's new finest. Many of the women wear white linen coifs to cover their hair. Take a closer look at Yote, Joshua's attendant, and you might see she wears a nice silver ring with a blue gem in it. Personality-wise, we see optimists and cynics.
Nearly half the crates were lost to bandits.
But half weren't, and their contents will see us through the season.
Eccentric researchers and stoic warriors. I really loved people watching in the Hideaway and dropping in on its residents from time to time. I can't understate the sense of subtle progression here. Revisiting it after certain story beats means that you can observe NPCs doing different things each time. The first time I noticed it was with the sweeper who cleans near Sid's chambers. He's not animated to walk around, he only sweeps in one spot. But where that spot is will shift depending on when you drop by. Have a look.
Careful you. I've spent the whole morning on these steps.
Later, these through lines manifested in clearer and more compelling ways too. In the early hours, I noticed a warrior speaking with a storekeeper about getting a new sword.
I suppose I'll be needing a new sword.
And later, walked in on him checking out new swords. I eventually learned that storekeeper's name too, Hortense. Similarly, I photographed this chef and overheard her name.
Need any help, Miss Molly?
Molly. Early on, the game labels her as Dauntless Bearer, while she goes around checking in on everyone at the local canteen.
What's this? Thirds is? You greedy pig.
But it wasn't until later that she became an actual character Clive could interact with. After the game's 5-year time skip, she ends up taking over as head chef. And you can see a common staff she works with, doing different things each time, and even learning from each other.
You'd think he'd have time for a nip with old August before scampering back to his solar, but no.
Lonely, are we, August?
You can also spot August having a drink early on, complaining about a grouchy friend of his. Though it won't be until later that Clive will start interacting with him on a first-name basis. He's got quite a few side quests about cheering up his grouchy friend. My favorite instance, though, concerns the bookish bearer, and 2 young kids she watches after in Act 1.
These apples are all foul. Would you rather you went without?
The kids are 2 of the only people who can see the Hideaway's Moogle, by the way.
Isn't the Moogle funny?
They also react if you come back after Clive says he's leaving for good.
I thought you said you weren't coming back.
Are you staying for good this time?
And if you come back in his new clothes.
Oh, nice cloak.
I want one.
Anyway, here's them with their sitter, the bookish bearer again. After the time skip, one of the kids seems to grow up to become a teacher named Miss Shirley, and she takes her former caretaker on as a student.
Little Shirley has grown into a fine woman. She's taught me that none of us are too old to learn.
It's a lovely arc, not least of all because the bookish bearer doesn't quite know how to read yet, but aspires to be a writer. Once the Hideaway establishes its school, she joins the younger kids as an avid learner under Shirley's tutelage.
I was thinking I might pen a novel of my own, to tell the story of the Hideaway. I change all the names, of course. Well, except for mine, that is.
Check in over time, and she starts to develop into a full-fledged writer.
Editors started reading books that don't have any pictures in. Why would anyone want to do that?
I have done it, Sid. I have learned all the letters, every one.
You can see different drafts of a story she's working on in the classroom, culminating in a final draft that recounts the narrative of the Hideaway, and featuring herself, Shirley, and the kids who study alongside her.
finally finished the book I was writing. You're welcome to read it.
We also know her full name, Edita R.R., which I just love as a name for a writer.
I knew it was a good idea to have Edita study alongside the children. It's really stoked their competitive spirit.
To make matters better, Shirley is labeled as Inquisitive Girl before the time skip, and there's at least one interaction where she pesters an old man about a book he's reading.
Is that book interesting?
You'd know, if you learned your letters.
I couldn't help but feel proud of her now. Characters honing their literacy now that they're free actually seems to be a big motif throughout the Hideaway. In the game's early hours, Goat works the ledgers alone because he's one of the few people who knows how to read.
If you can read, don't let Otto know. We'll put you to work on the ledgers too.
But you can spot this woman, Desiree, contemplating that she doesn't feel useful enough at the canteen. So she eventually starts practicing reading. 5 years later, she finds her niche, assisting Goat with the ledgers. Visit the prison, and you might find the suspicious assassin who Sid apprehended. The first time you can see him, he's lying down, exhausted. The second, he's knocking on the bars, desperate to get out. The third, he's sitting slumped against them, seemingly having given up.
Fellow back there's an intelligencer, tasked with tracking down Sid. Got separated from his unit and left for dead, till his target found him and brought him back here. Half wish he'd left him there.
Afterwards, he's released and presumably rehabilitated. He makes a lot of snarky comments towards you, but seems to be living his best life at the Hideaway.
Not about to have another fit, are you? Of course you aren't. You're a changed man now. We both are.
The game achieves a lot of triumphs when it comes to its NPCs, but its approach to capturing change through a time skip is perhaps its greatest. Perhaps two of the most obvious vignettes include that of Jackin, a young boy who makes friends with various animals around the settlement. Consider visiting him as you progress throughout the game, and you'll see him with different critters, depending on where you're at in the story.
Do you have a name, doggy? I'd call you Torgal, but that one's already taken.
The other is of Asta, the hopeless romantic. Visit her periodically, and you'll see her wistfully crushing on a different character each time.
Now, there's a man I could get behind. Though I'd rather have him behind me.
And even changing her outfit to match whatever man she's interested in. When she's pining after Otto, she'll clad herself in green like him. When her heart yearns for Gav, she'll match his armor by putting on this terracotta dress. When she's interested in Goots, the merchant with a giant backpack, she'll sling on a backpack herself. I won't cover all of these, but she'll also wear a silk white gown, matching the fashion of Sanbrakoy royalty for Prince Dion, a dark hood for Joshua that's reminiscent of what his devotees wear.
If Prince Dion cannot see my love for him, then perhaps the Phoenix will.
And finally, a red dress for Clive himself that matches his default outfit.
All this time, my heart has wandered hither and thither in search of the perfect companion. When all along he was here, standing right beside me.
In my book though, Asta's best fit is during the short window after Dion leaves, but before she moves on to Joshua. She wears this royal blue dress and the fanciest jewelry set in the Hideaway in prep of her date with nobility. Except, who for?
Have you seen His Highness the Prince? We were to dine together, or so I was going to suggest. Before he vanished, that is.
As hither yon dance autumn winds atop the autumn pier.
I suppose now I'll just have to ask the bard.
This is all consistent with what I've observed in past Final Fantasy games, not just the recent ones, but also some older generation titles. Rather than procedurally generate NPCs in random outfits, towns, or buildings, feature curated sets of characters who grow, develop, live, fight, die, or present niche running gags throughout the length of the game. This isn't how most modern games handle NPCs. In fact, it feels like a holdover from the days of old, when RPG towns could feature 9 or 10 set characters apiece, and each character would be distinguished through some quirky fear or obsession, often hinting at discoveries yet to come, or adjusting their dialogue based on where you are at in the game. It's a clever way of working with constraints and creating a sense of progression in spite of them. Final Fantasy has always taken this approach, and the series' NPCs hold a special kind of charm because of it. I appreciate that Square has continued this style of NPC development even with its recent titles. The game makes good on its promise here. Bearers are shown living full, free, and challenging but fulfilling lives. Now that they're no longer forced to use magic, they'll do their chores by hand. You can see them washing and drying clothes by hand. Growing an absolutely beautiful garden downstairs, which you can watch develop over time.
That sun, these leaves should have withered long ago.
But we found a way. Life has found a way.
Talking to the graves of their loved ones, getting up to mischief, and talking about sewing clothes for each other. You might even see new recruits don those new clothes if you're perceptive.
You look just like a princess! And you look like the princess's sister!
I especially like the snowflake patterns on this woman's dress, and the detailed stitching on these sleeves. Characters you rescue in the outside world actually show up here. At one point, some of the kids will carve drawings into the floorboards here, and from then on, anytime you look at those floorboards, you'll see the markings still there, permanently etched in. I like the interconnectedness of the world here too. Once you finish a certain side quest in Dalimil, helping a baker discover a new kind of bread, that bread will start to pop up in the Hideaway. Some other sites around the settlement include the knights who train by the pier, the carpenters who toil away nearby, the spoony bard and his successor who sing of your most recent adventures, and these bar patrons, who will argue about whether Yvonne or Molly has cooked up a better dish after you've helped them with their recipes. Around the new library, you'll see the kids Tet and Crow, who like to tease the lawsman from time to time. We see lightness and levity in the margins.
The lawsman says I can borrow as many books as I can carry. This was all I could carry.
And while it makes sense that coziness doesn't translate to the rest of the outside world, I do wish the diversity of personality here did. These moments are not restricted to lightheartedness either. We see at least one patient suffering from PTSD from the assault on the old Hideaway 5 years ago. We also see anger in the form of the Cursebreakers, the Hideaway's warrior faction that dedicates itself to going out into the world to free them through force. On occasion, you can run into them in the field, otherwise uninhabited places, emphasizing the sense they're an active combat and scouting faction. Some of the game's best minor characters are found within this crew, and when Final Fantasy XVI takes the time to unpack their backstories, we get some genuinely effective moments of storytelling. Sorrow, rage, and retribution against the systems that made them. We see them pay tribute to those who suffered with them, and those who couldn't be here today. I'm personally of the opinion that the main story of FF16 oversimplifies things in its final act, overgeneralizes what it means to be a slave by becoming a story about being a slave to fate in the absence of free will instead. This does do wonders for Clive's story, but at the same time, I'm a player who values the trees as much as I do the forest. I didn't find the deeper, more specific exploration of the people of Valisthia's psyche I longed for in my fights against its final boss, but I did glimpse it here, in the margins instead. I found it in its sub-stories and some surprisingly potent side quests in its NPCs of the Hideaway. FF16's attention to minor characters and continuity extends past the Hideaway too. Two of my favorite examples are in the town of Lostwing.
What'll we do for supper?
We'll fill our bellies with thoughts of tomorrow's catch.
Note this young boy and his fisherman grandfather, who chat by the dock. Now, watch what happens after the game's 5-year time skip. The boy grows up and takes over the trade.
You're quite talented with that rod of yours.
I've caught my share with it, as did my grandfather before me.
There's also a woman who lives in a shack behind the river that's just a little more secluded than the other houses. The game describes her as hard-bitten villager.
Most of us came to Lostwing to get away from the kind of thing that happened last night. Oh, which only makes it worse.
Anytime you visit her, she'll be lighting her pipe with a crystal, and might make a snarky comment or two about world affairs. Her one companion? The village dog, who always lurks around the house. Despite how abrasive and isolated she is though, she loves her town as much as anyone else there. Any man or force of nature who threatens it will have to pry it from her cold, dead hands, she says.
Yardan say the floods are closer than they've ever been. Let the ether turn me from teat to toe then. I won't be running.
Lostwing is small as a community but tightly knit, with multiple recognizable characters and relationships.
You're the kind man who saved Mummy. Thank you. I knew you'd save them. I told Mummy you would. Can I have another cup, Daddy?
There'll be none left for me.
You can observe the women gossiping about what goes on at the vineyard.
But how did the grocer know his daughter had been stealing off to the vineyard to see the lad? There were purple handprints all over her skirts.
You can observe them practicing their faith at the small but notably ambient church, headed by an elderly priest whose faith in their regional god is one and the same with his faith in the town's political leadership. There's so much character in that detail alone.
Come, my children, the reckoning is nigh. Fret not, my children, for we are blessed by good Grieger, and that blessing is none other than Master Quinton.
For a smaller, more slice-of-life vignette, you can spot this couple arguing about what they'll have for dinner.
Don't tell me. Turnips for supper again.
Unless you'd rather have gazelle greens.
Or the fishmonger showing concern for his bearer.
That'll be enough for today. We don't need you risking the curse for a barrel of shad.
There is one regard in which I diverge from Russell's critique. For what it's worth, I do think we see a decent range of ways in how Valisthia's enslavers act and think. There are some vignettes and optional quests in the game's first half that show just how disturbed some of them can be. On the opposite side of the spectrum, we see masters who try their best to treat bearers humanely. Many of them are more sympathetic to the bearer's plight, as we see different cultures of service and/or ownership across the different towns. Lostwing is arguably the kindest about this. Bearers are treated far better here, with townspeople preferring to use crystals and even showing concern that they don't want to overwork anyone. They won't lord that kindness over their heads here either, unlike in the duchy.
You're safe here. They don't punish people like us for speaking our minds.
Truly. I'm hungry. My sister too, we're starving.
Subsequently, Lostwing is one of the only places I encountered a bearer who felt comfortable speaking out loud about her chores.
A whole day on the line and they're still not dry.
On a later visit, I even found one arguing that she wants to use her magic to help out, so her master won't have to waste crystals.
But what about the curse? Can't you use a crystal instead?
I'll be fine. Besides, the village can't be using its last few crystals to do its dirty laundry, can it?
Note that bearers here have healthy children. Those children might even express a desire to take on more work.
But when can I go on a special errand for Master Quinton?
I appreciate that the more humane treatment Lostwing extends towards them actually influences their behavior and choices here, noticeably differently from FF16's other towns.
I'm just glad to be back in time for the harvest. Don't you worry about those grapes. Rest for as long as you need.
That said, this behavior is still very service-oriented. To be clear, their gratitude makes sense. A lot of the bearers here are people you free from a nearby fortress, and the town, which is governed by a radical ally on a quest for vengeance, takes them in and patches them up. If you drop by just after storming the fortress, you can see some of their injuries while they're still fresh. You can see close-ups of them all huddled together and recovering too. Later, they get healed up and integrated into the community. At the tavern here, bearers sit in the same places and on the same levels as their masters. They also make casual conversation with them. It's a nice change of pace. One other fun detail: if you go back to the fortress right after you've besieged it, you might find a traveler or two on the road complaining about how they've arrived at the worst possible time.
So much for bedding down at the cairn.
All in all, I love the tightness of Lostwing as a community and how familiar all its townspeople are with one another. I mentioned how they work together by crystal light at night when you first arrive, and that early scene is emblematic of how they operate, all the way through. As Russell's essay identifies though, even these more sympathetic masters don't really grapple with their complicity within the system, how they benefit from it even as they try to subvert it. The bearers of Lostwing might be happier and enjoy a better quality of life, they might even volunteer their services because of it. But in the later chapters, you'll notice that parts of their bodies have been afflicted by the curse, same as anywhere else. They may get to sit with the average citizens, but they're still dressed in rags. The difference is in the autonomy of it. In the vineyards, you can see bearers choosing to water crops through magic, and also ones who opt to use regular old watering cans. They have choice, and that makes enough of a difference, for now. Later on, there is still a compelling, albeit simplistic, inversion here though. Ultimately, these people are defended and evacuated when the town gears up for war. Tragically, their masters, for lack of a better word, pay a steep price for it.
If you're ready, we leave at once.
Both the hard-bitten villager with the dog and the fisherman boy who grew up, for instance, go to war and don't make it back. The same is true of most of their neighbors we've just looked at. The only exception is Master Quinton, that tragic radical leader I mentioned earlier, the one the town put so much faith in he was seen as a religious blessing. In fact, that kid in the background who was so desperate to work for Quinton ends up being central to convincing him he should stay with them and rebuild. It's a humble mini-arc.
Quinton's gonna build us new Lostwing, and I'm gonna help.
Personally, I prefer the ending you get for doing even more of Quinton's questlines though. You can get him to take up a new job in office, leaving his devoted bearers to become self-sufficient without him, which was the kind of thing I always wanted to see more of. It's not quite the same level of self-sufficiency as seen in the Hideaway, but it's a nice start, and one well-suited to the legacy of Lostwing.
You'll find naught but the humble dwellings of our good citizens down here, both bearer and otherwise.
Lostwing may be the kindest and the most radical of FF16's towns. It certainly is among the most tragic to compensate. But Martha's Rest was the one I found most complex. Martha is an ally of the Hideaways who helps shelter bearers and runs an underground railway of sorts.
Sorry for before. Can't be too wary of strangers asking questions in our game.
NPCs in this region are kinder with either full sincerity or out of bitter obligation. In the neighboring town of Eastpool, for instance, we see one training her bearer to become a great baker like she herself is.
Not bad at all. We'll make a master baker of you yet.
We see them smiling and making conversation. We see crops watered by watering can instead of bearer magic. We see, also, that this doesn't necessarily mean the region is a monolith. An early side quest shows one friend turn against another after finding out he was secretly an unbranded bearer.
Ronald sent you after me, did he? Set an imperial dog on his best friend.
You were never branded. So that's how you stayed hidden.
Complete with a crystal he'd kept on hand, out of commitment to the bit.
Did you hear that Martha's been turning travellers away? Her beds are full of bearers.
She had a man of Grieger mopping their brows.
The whole thing's unseemly if you ask me.
In the later hours, when Martha's influence becomes more essential, some NPCs remain prejudiced, but they just know to be quieter about their disdain here. They might willfully misinterpret why Martha sends bearers away, as justification for why they still look up to her.
Whoever's idea it was to take those bearers away to Eastpool has my thanks.
Who else would it have been but Martha? She always puts the good of the town first, that one.
Take these women, for instance, whose gripes partly stem from the fact that they can't afford their own bearers.
Not like any of us lowborn can afford a bearer anymore.
We get to see how wealth and class interact with the perception of bearer ownership, and the layers behind this bitterness peel back over the course of the game. Speaking of layers, and I apologize for the non sequitur, I do, but look at how the vegetables unravel as you move through them in photo mode. When you enter the rest, you're greeted almost immediately by this cozy farm by the side. Here, you'll typically see these two farmhands at work, watering crops with a can, or tending to the soil. There's a chef who'll almost always be making soup as well. Catch him when it's a bit more cooked, and you can even see him scoop a bit of liquid into his ladle and taste test. As others have pointed out, the farm scarecrow, which crops up in more parts of the map too, is designed after a classical Final Fantasy Black Mage. You might also notice the hens in the backyard, where a little girl will comment that one has gone missing.
There's one missing.
This is such an RPG-ass premise for a side quest, by the way. I do appreciate that no one asks you to find her chicken for, like, 10 gil or something. But you can. You can spot it strutting about around town. The kids here include two siblings who are children of a sellsword, so you might spot them play acting and being warriors.
Please, teach me how to fight.
Right. If you're still here when my shift is over, I'll spar with you.
The rest also houses a booming bazaar, abuzz with chattering NPCs. As a fishing and farming town, Martha's Rest stocks a lot of produce, as you'll see here. The greens from the farm are prominently displayed on sale, for instance. In the back streets, you can find a brothel as well. Check out this courtesan with an early client.
You ain't pulled that sword from its scabbard in days.
Who's giving her the, admittedly, probably unintentional, hover hand. What's interesting is that this relationship develops over the course of the game, from suggestive but professional.
I'll be happy to show you how well I wield my blade after my shift's over.
Okay. to genuine companionship.
But the Empire have dragoons, wyverns.
And we have each other.
There's one other nice touch here. Clive first acquires his signature outfit, the one seen in the cover art, in Eastpool. So if you revisit the rest immediately afterwards, one of the ladies will compliment you on it.
Look at you all dressed up. You know what they say about a bear dressed in finery? His master didn't just buy him for his knack?
I didn't say it was a comfortable compliment. One of the earliest tragedies of the game takes place in Eastpool, where Martha sends a lot of her refugee bearers. It ends up razed to the ground by the Empire and taken over by bandits in the aftermath. You meet with the kind people here, go off on a quest, and come back to find those familiar faces all down in the dirt as bodies. This moment really got to me, as intended, as an early display of just how inhumanely Valisthia's greater powers see its bearers, as well as anyone associated with them. Like most other towns, the main settlement, Martha's Rest, takes a hit in the latter half of the game, but it also perseveres better than most. When the town is eventually attacked, it becomes noticeably deader and quieter. You might see these injured soldiers lying in the dirt, with concerned friends crouched over them.
This man's gonna die if we don't get him to a healer.
But all our beds are taken.
Come back after saving the town.
Thank the Finder.
I thought we'd lost him.
And you'll see them well on the path to recovery. They'll walk it off. Likewise, the two farmhands will be hiding, ducked in the backyard on your initial return. Later, you can see them comforting each other once the dust settles. You can see the courtesan and the sellsword here again too, showing legitimate concern for each other.
It doesn't still hurt, does it?
Oh, 1,000 Akashic jaws couldn't hurt me. I'm a son of Rosaria, after all. A born survivor.
As time goes on and the town changes, only the most loyal customers stay with its markets. You can see the merchants reeling from the damage. And later, taking stock and slowly getting their stalls set back up. Here's the lady who sells trinkets, and the fisherman who's brought in a partner to help, and the greengrocer. Also, some early tourists settle into the inn long term. As tensions mount around town, the bearers of the rest eventually move away and find a permanent home in Eastpool. There, they're joined by the surviving shields of Rosaria, from Clive's childhood. You can see them training these bearers for combat.
Eyes forward and strike. Yes, my lord.
Or teaching them how to farm independently here.
We had no idea what it meant to live free. But that's all going to change, starting now.
Coupled with the tragedy of this town pre-timeskip, the reclamation of Eastpool ended up being one of my favorite arcs in the game. In the interim, I would revisit it often to clear out bandits for no real reason, or to check in on the NPCs who would visit to pay their tributes here. Helping to actually reclaim it so many hours later into the game's runtime felt viciously cathartic. It was a long time coming, even if I did find the town's epilogue and the infantilization of its bearers to be a bit shallow.
We'll have to fatten the bearers up a bit so they can pull their weight and actually make a difference.
Look, despite what these videos might have you believe, I'm not a stickler for continuity or internal consistency, but I do care about thematic consistency. In the base game, the Hideaway remains the only place where these characters are actually autonomous, without so many teachers or guides to hold their hands. Bluntly, I love that they're shown being helped. I don't love that they're shown being helpless. Even then, the characters around Martha's Rest are still specific and defined, not unlike back home. At this juncture, I'm going to point out this one seemingly unimportant NPC named Brennan as an example. He's a sellsword, he's polite, he gives you a tip on a side quest, but there isn't much else to him. Still, the game bothers to name him, and it's worth remembering him for a note later down the line. As you've now seen, getting to know FF's very distinct NPCs can feel like a double-edged sword. These NPCs can get killed off in the crossfires of certain quests, and recognizing their clothes or character models played out as bodies hits strangely hard. But on the opposite side of that coin, you get to see their journeys at all. You see kids in school and get to know the teachers. See doctors at work and get to know their patients, their procedures, their moral dilemmas. You see the boy in Lostwing grow up. Or you see a young woman take after her grandpa. We now find ourselves in Northreach, a noticeably larger and wealthier town with a booming economy, where bearers are treated abhorrently. The first time you swing by, there's an old man who prattles on and tells stories by the tavern, while his granddaughter tells him to leave you alone, clearly embarrassed.
You! Where the devils who dwell upon western shores? His radiance did command a great legion across the grace, for to rid the realm of this stain, yet none did return, devoured all by the...
Oh, grandfather, stop bothering this poor man and eat your supper.
5 years later, he's gone. But the granddaughter has become a storyteller herself. You can find her near that old tavern, telling the kids around town various stories that reference Final Fantasy mythology.
And from the pot came a terrible cry. Give me an elixir! Give me an elixir!
And did they give him one?
Guess she's not embarrassed anymore. When you complete all the quests here, you can also find another NPC standing with them, one who will fondly reminisce about the tales he used to hear from her grandfather.
I remember standing here when I was no more than a stripling. The girl's grandfather would tell us tales of dragons and icons. I couldn't wait to leave town in search of adventures like the ones he told me about. Who knew they were waiting right here?
There's also a lonely soldier here who starts out by seeing various women at the local brothel, but he seems distracted, and ambivalent even in the first act of the game.
Well then, I suppose you'll need a little something to remember me by.
And I suppose I'll need to get my coin purse.
I haven't seen you around the Vale of late. Oh, don't tell me you've grown tired of us.
It's not that. The garrisons are being called back to the capital.
Later on, he starts seeing one of the male courtiers and becomes noticeably happier.
I want to see you again tonight, but the captain's late with our pay.
It's all right. I'll be waiting.
Though there is still the funny detail that he seems to always be broke. The courtier even reciprocates his affections, showing support and concern that extends past pure professionalism. He encourages him to follow his heart and fight for the town, even if against his master's orders.
Your town needs you. I need you. But the Duke would have me clapped in irons.
Or to take care of his own well-being.
Those things I said before about not being able to fight.
You didn't mean them. I know. That's not the man you are. The man I love.
I also appreciate that the courtesans in Martha's Rest, a small town, all wear red and dress roughly the same, while the ones here clearly have access to more funds and a broader clientele. There's a much wider pool of costumes that includes those reds, but also light greens, aquas, and purples. Cool toned colors.
But enough talk. How about we retire to the Vale?
I'd like that, but the Duke, he still hasn't paid us.
As for the bearers, this is where the blacksmith I mentioned at the start of the video hails from. There are also 2 side quests dedicated to showing how children perceive owning slaves, treating them like toys and playthings in dangerous games.
Bearers are tools when they're needed, and toys when they're not. And if one breaks, well, you can always buy another.
These are, of course, learned behaviors. When Clive speaks up against the parents about it, they only double down. Things don't really change for bearers in the short term around Northreach, but we do get a glimpse of how the crueler slave masters react to them losing their magic, and we can intuit that it will ripple into greater change in future.
Who does he think he is? Making me sweep up like a bloody branded.
In the Northreach markets, you can see a nobleman and a merchant with an ongoing feud. They rarely seem to agree on things.
The Duke only wishes to see us all safe, and he cannot do that without coin. I don't see what's so difficult to understand.
And I don't see you turning out your pockets.
When the town is under attack, the nobleman begs to borrow a chocobo.
I will give you 20 talents for that bird of yours. No, 30.
I told you, she's not for sale.
When the town is safe, he's grateful he didn't leave, because things turned worse outside.
And to think, I would be lying under a pile of rubble in Twinside.
If you'd ever got as far as setting out, yeah.
The merchant thinks he's an idiot. His fellow nobles think he's an embarrassment.
Do you see that? It's an absolute disgrace.
They're all right. The last we see him, he's as stuffy as ever, complaining about how he has to have a smaller house here than he'd have liked.
I told the dame I would take the largest residence in Northreach, yet she outright refused my coin. Some nonsense about having enough space for everyone.
Enjoy some scenes of the other villagers in the area. Their budding romances.
Think I might see you tonight?
That depends on how much you want to see.
And commercial woes. Here's a look at the garrison that defends the town too. They wear more neutral colors, and their armor isn't quite as stylized as Rosaria's. Northreach also features a great scene depicting mutual aid. There's a soup kitchen of sorts just by the garrison, where injured and hungry citizens can crowd around for food and comfort. Have a look. Northreach gives us an early taste of the interconnectivity of FF16's world too. There are several Dhalmekian-inspired wares in stock at the markets here. Shopkeepers peddle fancy, colorful rugs, while garbed in fancy, colorful kurtas. Here are some other sights from around the markets. On the subject of interconnectivity, you can also encounter travelers and refugees on the roads around here.
We have nothing since fleeing the Republic.
But we do. Our lives? And each other?
With many of them spawning after you visit Dhalmekia, as they're trying to get away from there in the wake of the chaos that's arisen around those parts. There are a group of porters called the Crimson Caravan in Dhalmekia, and here I encountered a couple who had enlisted one of those porters to escort them all the way near Northreach, much to the porters' delight.
There were no more goods to transport, it's true,
But people, there was no shortage of those.
Northreach holds up quite well against the final villain's forces, all things considered. Though the townspeople almost come to a political deadlock here, they're able to ultimately resolve their differences and come together against the greater threat. There are some great scenes of them organizing here. Have a look.
What's all the commotion?
Town's going to war. You can help, or you can get out of the way.
You can even spot that stuffy nobleman carrying crates around and pitching in.
We did it! Kiss me.
At this juncture, I'm also going to flag a second, seemingly unimportant NPC. The bard in Northreach, who, like any of the other bards, strums his lute while singing of his town's exploits.
Me? I am but a nameless weaver of song, who would warm the hearts of the good folk of this town with such humble cloth as the muse might permit me to make.
There are also a few smaller towns in FF16 that don't fare as well as Martha's Rest and Northreach. Moor, which is near Northreach, is quite awful to bearers, so the game treats its destruction almost like a comeuppance. Amber is similarly short-lived and almost as unwelcoming. It's certainly gloomy until it meets a similar fate. Revisiting them in the late game, you'll be met by bandits or zombies instead. The third, Mikkelburg, is populated by villagers so engrossed in their fate that they behave almost like a cult, praying for salvation through giving their bodies up to a greater power. They want to become zombies. Essentially everyone you encounter here holds the same pose, hands clasped together, in deep thought, ready to go gently into the dark night.
Be made pure. Let us be made divine.
Here's a closer look at the various costumes average civilians wear around these towns, which draw influence from various medieval European locales. Parrish's article points out that the larger region of Sandbreck seems to pull from Napoleonic France, while the Crystalline Dominion pulls from the Holy Roman Empire. Art director Hiroshi Minagawa cites he pulled influence from North England, Slovenia, and Iceland for the locales as well. This is in contrast to our next handful of towns in the desert regions of Talmechia. As mentioned earlier, FF16's desert civilizations were inspired by the Middle East and North Africa, but Minagawa cites Final Fantasy XII's own desert settlement of Dalmasca as an influence as well. I believe their apparel draws influence from more parts of the real world too, all amalgamating into an interesting cultural mishmash. Some of the women's clothes are reminiscent of saris and salwar kamizes as seen around South Asia, especially the shawls they drape around their necks, and the ornate jewelry they put on as casual wear. The men might wear shawls over their shoulders too. The turbans and headscarves are closer to what you might see in the Middle East, and make sense for protection against the sun and dust. In fact, if you look closely, you'll note that some of the travelers actually do have dust or sand on their clothes, which discolors them a little bit. I really like the fabric patterns around this region, many of which are diamond or, let's say, crystal shaped. Note that their courtesans wear very different clothes too, sleeveless with bold, vivid colors in contrast to Northreach's pastels. Unlike Martha's Rest or Northreach, there's no romantic through line with any of the specific workers. Clients might have favorites, but they'll request different women at different times. The workers will keep things casual and professional. Even their dance animations are culturally distinct, featuring claps, hand gestures, playful step combinations, and overall expressive movements. Here, you can see a store selling various beads and accessories that both men and women of the region wear. Wealthier characters wear gold and heavy jewelry. Dalimil is the largest town in the region, and features such scenes as the aristocrat and the bearer I mentioned earlier, these two kids who sit on this wall but go on to have a larger role in later side quests, and this woman who smokes on the rooftops during your early visits. Before considering giving up smoking at the end of the game.
I've half a mind to give up tobacco altogether. It's hardly worth the effort it takes to light it.
Let me have yours then. I've been practicing with a flint.
A what?
Also, if you happen to run up to those rooftops during the Dalimil riots, you can see that woman stand and spectate from a distance, from next to her friend. The riot itself is a scene I just don't like. The townspeople find out that one of their own, Lubor, is a closeted bearer. Those two kids rush in to defend him, reminding them all how kind and helpful and useful he is. This causes them to stop attacking him, and Lubor is ultimately defined by his usefulness, same as any other bearer. Though the townspeople eventually go on to elect him mayor, it's only because they've learned the completely wrong lesson. The game doesn't really reckon with that, outside of some ancillary dialogue.
I knew I was right not to give up on Lubor. He'll make a wonderful mayor.
Aye, he served the town well enough, but then he is a bearer, born to serve, and long may it last.
That's fine, entertaining and compelling even, when it happens to non-characters like the aristocrat.
Clumsy lout. If anything's damaged, it's the lash for you. What do they mean? I never mistreat my bearers.
But I have to hold the game's actual quest lines to a higher standard. Dalimil's arc is a little icky compared to the others. Unlike Martha's Rest, this is a place where greens are decidedly not in abundance, and the markets reflect that. Shopkeepers can set unnaturally high prices for them. There's high demand and short supply in the desert.
1,000 gil for a measly bunch of Gazal greens.
I named my price. If you can't pay it, that's your problem. How would you like some fresh Gizal greens? 2 bunches for 3,000. I'm practically giving them away.
What they do have in bulk, though, are lentils. They have herbs and spices, and meat skewers. They're also famous for their local hot spa. You can see a bunch of NPCs hanging out in the resort.
Let me treat you. I'm pretty flush these days.
Are you now?
You're going to drink my pockets dry, then just up and leave?
Why, yes. My thirst is slaked, and I see no other reason to abide your company.
Some recognizable character pairings include this mother and son, who hug for comfort when things get tough, and find new resolve later.
When I'm older, I'm gonna join the town guard and keep everyone safe.
That's my boy. You grow up strong now and protect your mother.
This father and son, this old lady who daydreams by the water, and these 2 courtesans who exclusively take on rich soldiers as their clientele, until the soldiers leave and they have to rethink business.
Oh, where did all the men of the rock go? Probably ran out of gil, just like us.
Due to its proximity to a major crystal, Dalimil also houses several miners. They're forced to rethink business too, due to later events in the game. Same as with the other towns, a lot of the town's economy gets upended in the final chapter, and at least one NPC, a bearer, gets killed off. And like the other towns, the townspeople rebuild. and band together to fight off the threat. The cool thing about Dalimil is that you can actually see them divvy up evacuation responsibilities versus battle responsibilities. A lot of these townsfolk you've seen idle up to this point will take up arms and stand proud, poised for battle with swords in hand. Amidst the crowd, you'll spot at least one soldier who didn't abandon the town, even after his fellow men of the Rock did. Here's a close-up of the champ, his scimitar slung over one shoulder, and his metallic bracers. Later, you can overhear one of his fellow townspeople thank him for not ditching them, unlike his old colleagues. There's a nice full-circle moment with the kids. The first time you can see them is when they're hanging out on this wall, and after you go through all their quests, when they express a desire to fight against Dalimil's attackers, or they stand up for Lubor, they'll eventually return here, to chill out at the usual spot again. At peace now. There's no local bard in this town, but a music performance with a lute does break out in the street when you hit the end of the game. Here's a look at the celebrations when all the fighting is over. You might hear a lot of the townsfolk of Dalimil invoke Gilbert.
Gilbert, take this crystal!
Thank Gilbert the guards closed the gates.
Thank Gilbert the beasts never found their way into our cellars.
Whose name the word Gil, the game's main currency, comes from. A friend pointed out the meaningfulness of this detail. It alludes to the near religious importance the greater region of Talmechia places on its culture of trade and commerce. There's also a Talmechian named after Gilbert at the Hideaway, by the way. Accordingly, we now find ourselves in the Boklad markets, a major commercial hub populated by all kinds of merchants, nomads, and porters. It's also populated by refugees. See, Boklad's arc isn't quite as uplifting as the other towns. You'll see a mass migration through the bazaar when you first arrive, but on later revisits, you'll find those familiar, recognizable refugees never made it out. Instead, they set up tents and hunkered down here. The mood noticeably shifts over time. Initially, these traveling families lean on each other for comfort and assurance. Over time, you can see just how dejected each of the families becomes. An example. Early on, you might notice these two kids drawing in the dirt. The developers actually take into account the material and medium here. Unlike in the Hideaway where the markings were drawn permanently on wood, these drawings etched in mud erode away in later visits. The kids' spirits do too. They start out the game playing, and end praying for something better. Likewise, the markets start out vibrant and busy. Hawkers yell from all sides, advertising their wares and standing upright with confidence. Here's a look. Later, they count their stocks untouched, and practically give away goods for free. The liveliness around the tavern dies down. NPCs reach out bowls and beg in the streets for money, food, water. It's all quite oppressive. Here's the most interesting part of Boklad's arc. You start out by seeing the boar scrambling to get out of the markets. Near the end of the game, wealthy noblemen scramble to get in. The game highlights the disparity between them, coming in with precious items they can sell.
What am I to do? My entire fortune sleeps at the bottom of the Strait of Author.
Not your entire fortune. Those rings will buy you some bread.
And those who suffered before, arriving with nothing. Again, it communicates both narrative and thematic resolution through its NPCs. One thing I appreciated about FF16 was that its crowds and NPC density always felt just right. Although Boklad is cramped, I never felt overstimulated by the mass of voices here, which is a common issue I've run into with other games. The only times I did were when it was deliberate. when Square was purposefully depicting loud, downtrodden crowds meant to make me feel overwhelmed. One thing I didn't appreciate, Boklad features a jarring side quest in which you encounter a band of friendly goblin NPCs, and learn that they're not so different from humans. If we bothered to talk to them, we'd see they could be reasoned with. Mission complete. Nice message, right? Anyway, just a few steps from their cave, there are goblin mobs to fight, and none of this is brought up again. I don't know what they were trying to say with this side quest, so I'm just going to be charitable and say they weren't. Before we leave Boklad, I'm going to highlight our third and final quote-unquote unimportant NPC. There's an old gossip monger who roams around the markets, making lighthearted conversation. Remember that face.
These pears are a little overripe.
You can say it. They're rotten. The crystals we use to keep them cool on the journey from the orchards barely do anything anymore.
There are a handful of smaller towns around Talmekia I want to drop in on, each specializing in the manufacture of different wares, and thereby tying back to the region's dependence on trade. First up is Dravozd, a smithing town. It is a town designed purely for a line of side quests, and so the scope of detail in it feels that much more commendable. There's no shortage of blacksmiths around Valisthea, but Dravozd depicts the most involved workflow of any, with not only a standard forge operated by a handful of recognizable NPCs, but also an old smelter built in close proximity to the mines for ease of access to ores. Bearers work the forges and look just as exhausted as anywhere else. Again, they don't get much characterization here. The other townsfolk do though. There are at least two families whose stories will progress over time. One, this son who's desperate to live up to his father.
Why hasn't Papa come back yet?
He's helping the chief with something very important. You go back inside now.
But I want to go with you.
And I want you to stay here and look after your mother.
Across a lot of these storylines, you'll notice kids in Valisthea are forced to grow up fast.
I want to play with the hammer, Daddy.
All right. It's about time you started learning the trade.
And then, too, this blacksmith trying to live up to his great-grandfather.
That's my obituary written then. A man who closed the doors on his great-grandfather's forge.
Oh, don't say that. It's not over yet. Let me help. Promise you'll come back to me. Don't you dare leave me alone.
I promise, alright? Now stay indoors and stay quiet.
It was a nasty gash that demon gave you. You sure it doesn't hurt?
Only when I laugh.
When the town makes provisions to fend off an attack, there's also a funny line about the local vendor that reminded me of a classic bit from Final Fantasy X.
The brass neck of that girl. Everyone's coming together to fight for their lives, and she hasn't lowered her prices a gill.
We gotta pay? If we lose, you'll die too, buddy.
I have faith in your victory.
Gee, thanks.
After Dravozd comes Tabor, a hunting and leather manufacturing town, two occupations that complement each other nicely. Here you can see the local hunters dressed in colorful but raggedy clothes. New boots with visible stitches that all give off a handmade feel.
How are those new boots treating you?
They're fantastic. Soft as phoenix down, but tough as boiled bow.
And lo and behold, it is all handmade. Here, you can see the tanners working on various stages of the hides the hunters have brought back, fleshing it, and cleaning and converting it to leather. I really love how much care Tabor and Dravozd pay to depicting process. Giant domes also loom over the town, reminiscent of the roofs of mosques. Tabor is vertically layered in a way FF16's other towns aren't, and on higher levels, you can see villagers enjoying downtime and socializing, sharing bowls of orange slices, gazing out at the horizon. away from the hustle and bustle of industry. One note though, Tabor's NPCs are fairly static. It's the last town you visit, so it doesn't really depict any of these characters going through meaningful change. They just exist.
Thank you for the deal egg, mister. Mummy made a pottage from it.
Sounds delicious. Perhaps you'll invite me around to try it next time.
However, hunting and leather manufacturing are not the only vocations in Tabor. Clive and Joshua's reason for coming here is to meet with a secret organization of spies called the Undying, hooded NPCs devoted to serving Joshua, who, incidentally, also look like characters out of Assassin's Creed. These spies can be found in other parts of the world too, like the ruined city of Kratov, which is now uninhabited but very much a subject of investigation for them. Or they can be found in Martha's Rest, Northreach, and Boklad. Remember those characters I flagged as unimportant? Once you gain the Undying's trust, you can revisit Brennan the Sellsword, the Northreach Bard, and the Boklad Gossipmonger to learn that they're all secretly spies who've been working for you all along.
Don't look so surprised. I expect the Burning Quill already told you that the Undying have eyes everywhere, and mine just happened to be here in the rest.
My Lord Marquis, forgive me for not introducing myself sooner. I am of the Undying.
I too serve the Phoenix, my lord, though in an altogether more lowly capacity than the bearer of the Burning Quill.
Each is looking into a different regional phenomenon that has to do with the main story. The base game leaves the Bard's investigation unresolved, however. Why is there a giant frozen wave near Northreach? That answer comes in the shape of a new island. After the Hideaway, Haven is my favorite spot in all Valisthea. Introduced as part of the Rising Tide expansion, it is a secluded village in the region of Mysidia. Like other Mysidias in the series, it's a place with a special connection to mages and sorcery. Even the equipment on sale is named after a Mysidian mage from Final Fantasy II. Before we even step foot into the town though, I have to highlight how smartly FF16 foreshadows its DLC. In the base game, you could hear the people of Eastpool, both pre- and post-time skip, speculate about the mysterious tower nearby.
Relic of the Fallen it is. Must have stood there 1,000 years. And in all that time, no one's ever been inside.
Months before it was revealed as the setting for FF16's first expansion. Those present-day NPCs even update their dialogue if you complete the tower.
Shouldn't we at least have warned him?
What? With the corpse lights dancing around that infernal tower? They're hard to miss.
What do you reckon happened to them lights on the spire?
Who cares? Good riddance, I say.
Pre-time skip, you can also see two farmers speculating about the giant frozen wave off the coast of Northreach.
You see it too, then? It's not just me bleary eyes playing tricks on me.
If you mean the waves stopped at full crest, then yes, I do. How could I miss the bleeding thing?
The truth behind that wave is revealed here, in Mysidia. It's tied to the Kaiju Leviathan, whose story was also foreshadowed by the storyteller and her grandfather before her. Creative Business Unit 3 did not know at the time of release whether they would get to pursue DLC, but it's clear from the NPCs that they planned well ahead in case they got the green light.
From the sea, a mighty serpent rose, and with a roar that shook the heavens, summoned a swell to swallow the western sands. But, we can finish the rest tomorrow.
Tomorrow? But I want to hear what happens now.
That to be continued carries over right into Mysidia, which hosts a storyteller of its own. Just like in Northreach, you can see the kids gathering around him at different points throughout the game, to be bestowed a different droplet of wisdom each time, except when he's sleeping. In a bit of a fun coincidence, he resembles the elderly storyteller from 5 years ago.
Please, Grandad, tell us another story about the witch.
You see, children, we are but drops of rain, flowing from mountain to valley, stream to river, until at last our journey ends out in the open sea.
The people of Haven call themselves the Moats of Water. As you can tell from the old man's dialogue, they have a connection to the water that is truly, and I promise there's no better word for this, elemental. A gushing river runs through the village, and banners bear the symbol of the ceaseless rill. The rill comprises interlocking strands symbolizing the flow of water, a lifeblood for the tribe, and a line running through representing their worship of the water icon, Leviathan. Much of the tribe comprises palette swaps of other existing NPC models, but they all have unique design flourishes, darker complexions, silver hair, and cool clothes bearing the symbol of the ceaseless rill. They won't necessarily wear the same parts of the rill either, showing that different townspeople might place greater emphasis on different sides of what it stands for. Fun fact, you can spot two kids scribbling the rill in the dirt.
And what are you two drawing?
The rill? We're seeing who's fastest, and I'm going to win.
Again, unlike the Hideaway floor scribble, this one isn't permanent. In fact, it probably gets washed up by the flood that happens partway through the DLC. Revisit the same spot, and you'll find puddles in its wake. By the village entrance, you can spot NPCs praying to a menhir with the rill engraved on it. Their prayers too change as you progress. Townspeople also pick flowers by the river. Which you later learn get pressed into the dye they use in their fabrics to make the rill. See these bowls? They're culturally significant too. An NPC refers to them as mirrors and says how you see yourself in them says something about you.
The mirrors. My people believe they frighten off trespassing demons by showing them the evil in their hearts. Would you care to take a look?
Look closely, and you can see they have water in them, as part of how the reflection works. Like I said, elemental. As with the towns in the base release, Haven stars recognizable sets of characters who update as you make progress. They might be repairing a bridge when you first arrive, finish just in time for your next quest, and then just take on other background projects around the village. There's a pretty funny farmhand at the local farm who watches after the hens.
I give you my grain, you give me your eggs. Everyone's happy. Except for the eggs, maybe.
So these hens were a gift from the dame, were they? There are more than I can count.
You do have two hands, you know.
He raked in a good laugh for me with this visual pun.
I'm never going to find that blasted needle.
I really enjoyed seeing the farm develop over time too. There's a mother-daughter duo, where the mom constantly fusses over her kid about different things.
Just you stay away from that temple. Do you hear me?
I heard you the first time.
If we pick too many of the flowers, there won't be enough left to go to seed. And then next year, we won't have any.
I heard the tributary can fell an ibex from 100 paces.
And you could too if you put your mind to it. The blessing of the rill flows within you both.
And there's this family, comprised of 3 generations of women.
Look, Nan, it's the outsiders.
Hush! It's not polite to call outsiders outsiders.
They do a lot of arts and crafts together, and are actually responsible for a lot of the banners and pennons hung up around town.
Like this, Nan.
That's right, just see those knots are tight, or we'll lose the pennants to the wind. So the storm has finally passed.
Am I not held, Nan? You see?
The developers do a cute little thing with Jill's affinity for handcrafting here. She grows close with these women in the periphery. Have a look.
I don't know if she mentioned, but your friend Jill helped me remake the talismans we decorated the Witten Hall with for young Wallace's immersion. And a dab hand she was too. If she ever wants to leave your tribe for hours, I'll put in a good word with the tributary.
It's quite fun seeing these characters go from being wary of the party to accepting them into the community. There are a ridiculous number of voice lines and actions that only trigger during the briefest windows. Take this woman, who's rallying some villagers to start sweeping together.
The broom is your warhammer. The leaves our mortal enemy. Show them no mercy for the glory of Mysidia.
You visit a single quest marker, and suddenly, they're disbanded and actually sweeping. The game uses this for maximum effect to set up its side quests well in advance. There's a quest line where you help an old man through his sudden illness, which you ultimately learn was psychosomatic from seeing outsiders again. Believe it or not, this didn't come as a surprise to me. When you first arrive in Haven, it's possible to actually see him have a panic response at the sight of you.
Intruders! We must flee!
It's all right. They're the tributaries' guests.
After what their kind did to us. It's wrong.
Hinting at the symptoms yet to come. Similarly, you can spot this woman, who's dressed quite a bit differently from the other motes, and over here she used to work out in Northreach.
You used to work on the outside, didn't you? Is it really like the sea it is? If you mean filthy, noisy and rank, then no. It's much, much worse.
Suddenly, the costume makes perfect sense. Later, there's a quest about her being followed by a mysterious figure, who, sure enough, is an old lover from Northreach.
I'm more than all right. I'm saved! Oh, I could kiss you!
Maybe you should introduce yourself first.
There's quite a bit of tension over how to deal with him. Their storyline spans past the side quest, and you'll have to check in at different points if you're curious to see it resolve. You can hear NPCs discuss being bearers too, before Clive learns they live in harmony, shoulder to shoulder with the average citizens here. Overall, Haven offers an almost utopian blueprint for what that kind of harmony could look like, much like the Hideaway, though it too has its dark history to overcome. But overcome it they will. You can see them regrouping and rebuilding after the flood here. The developers went truly above and beyond with Haven. Not only do the NPCs react to you pushing ahead in the main campaign, but they'll also shift around and react to the nearby side quests you take on. Take these guards, who brace for combat after you fend off a Tonberry assault. One other detail I love is that the motes of water use a lot of water-related phrases in their day-to-day vernacular. Have a listen.
You weren't dreaming, Dewdrop.
I bid you good tide.
What am I always telling you?
Never turn your back on the tide.
Till next our streams cross.
Grant me the strength to tame the troubled waters of mine heart.
Till next our streams cross, here's a last look at the townspeople before we close.
Ma'am, I want to play with the others.
Well, you should have thought about that before making such a mess. Oh, it's good of you to humour the children like you do.
Me humour them? I think it's more the other way around.
I don't have much to say about Final Fantasy XVI's photo mode. It has all the standard features, especially as of the April 2024 update. You can adjust focus and focal length, do tone correction, toggle a portrait mode, etc. It's quite good, despite its limited range. What I appreciate about all this is that FF16 contains quite a few grisly scenes. The artists went to great lengths to depict specific violences committed against specific bodies. And while I did capture a lot of that throughout my playthrough, it didn't feel tasteful to show it all through passive close-ups. By playing around with framing and focus, I could express those scenes in implicit, less gratuitous ways. I felt this better reflected the actual experience of walking past that bloodshed, while still paying attention. My favorite thing about the photo mode, though, actually concerns FF16's larger UI. Early on, your menus and sliders are all a neutral blue, but once Clive accepts and awakens his power as a dominant of fire, they become a hot red. It's awesome. Menu design synergizing with narrative? You love to see it. My praise for the larger narrative itself is more weighted. The game's depiction of slavery is an imperfect parallel for the cosmic plight of fate versus free will. Some of the side quests have nothing to say, while others bury the lead, having a lot to say, but with little way for the player to distinguish them from the rest. The game also goes to great lengths to show Valisthia's many religions, but doesn't foreground any of them until the very last act, despite religious zealotry playing a crucial role in how this all started. It's clear that Creative Business Unit 3 did a lot of research into real-life histories of enslavement, but at many points, the plight of the bearers feels just as much compelling as an extension of the real-life history of witch hunts. The antagonistic Circle of Malleus, for instance, calls to mind the Malleus Maleficarum, a grotesque 1486 book penned by a Catholic clergyman that called for, quote-unquote, heretics and witches to be tortured or burned. The Rising Tide DLC makes this subtext actual explicit text. The Motes of Water were religiously persecuted because their faith did not align with the Gregorian churches, and one of their major historical figures was an actual witch, said to have been ostracized by her people. The dangers of slavish fanaticism are a major theme throughout the base game, and I appreciate Rising Tide for highlighting that fanaticism does not take place within isolated fringe communities like Mikkelburg alone. It is not a problem we only see in cults. It is baked into Valisthia's culture on a systemic level. They drove away an entire people through religious discrimination, and remnants of that bigotry still linger in new shapes. Final Fantasy XVI has been a tough one to document. I think it's got more depth and especially charm than it gets credit for, but the jury's still out on how much that matters when so much of it is off the beaten path. Still, there are some invaluable lessons here. First, it is a masterclass in how to do a time skip in an interactive medium. Its 5-year jump dramatically changes the world and reflects both actual meaningful NPC growth and Clive's growing familiarity with them. Secondly, these NPCs broadly having stories of their own does contribute thematically. The major towns show that when politicians quibble and fail to produce results, there is power among the people, especially banded together. Thirdly, as much as I loved the game's combat, I confess I would have found 60 straight hours of it tiring. With no minigames or puzzles to distract from it, this exercise in following and photographing Valisthia's NPCs felt like both a much-needed rest between battles and a rich social mechanic. One CBU 3 has poured a surprising level of love, detail, and consistency into. These NPCs might not do much, and might follow canned animations, but just knowing those placements and animations could be tweaked for familiar characters each time I would visit, that the dialogue could pick up where old interactions had dropped off, that there was room to interpret these shifts differently and use my own imagination, helped me feel that they were living characters with their own arcs regardless. In spite of my many critiques, I came away from FF16 with a deep appreciation for its NPC designs, and what they stand for in its emotionally harrowing but viciously resilient world. Seeing Valisthia at its coldest is bone-chilling, but whether it's 5 strings of dialogue or 5 years later, the warmth is always sure to follow.
Do you hear that, ladies and gents? The next round's courtesy of the realm's most benevolent outlaw.
Hey! Thanks so much for watching that. This video is actually part of a series in which I look at NPCs and even more games that pique my interest. I also make video essays about games, movies, and all that good stuff. So if you like my work, consider subscribing. I've linked my Ko-Fi below too. It's an optional tip jar if you want to throw a sandwich or coffee my way or something. Last but not least, I've included links to the social media pages where I post my photos, down below in the description. Juxtaposed with my photos, you might find some short stories I've come up with about the various NPCs I've looked at. So, enjoy? Thank you again for sticking around, and until next time, remember that every stranger on the street's got a story, and every story can only get stranger.